It is time for the Media Beat with David Tereshchuk. David joins us on a Friday morning, and we rebroadcast David during the weekend, and we also play David's show after our 12 noon news the following week. David has his own website, themediabeat.us, and he's also a PBS television correspondent reporting on ethics and belief. Good morning, David. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Well, I'm very glad to be with you. I'm back in the media capital of the world, New York City, and always glad to be reporting in for the always pertinent questioner, Marshall Miles, to discuss the week's news.
Well, the week's news, I guess we're going to start off with what happened last night when I went to bed early. Joe Biden gave a forceful speech last night with a 6-step strategy and basically telling the American people he has lost his patience.
Indeed, Biden's six-pronged plan to beat back the very resurgent COVID pandemic comes at a time when, sure, the tempers are getting frayed, and that includes the president's too, losing patience with the people who have not gotten themselves vaccinated. It's building, the plan seems very clearly building on the momentum that's already been there, thank goodness, although not sufficiently built up yet. And this is now his building up of the momentum for vaccination via mandate or sanctions, wherever the government has the wherewithal to do that, to impose those mandates and the sanctions sometimes for people who don't get vaccinated. There's a new emphasis on using the government machinery to actually enforce it, like the federal funding that's available to institutions that are healthcare related. That's basically the Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements that they get, but they won't get them if their employees are not vaccinated. And the same with OSHA, the work safety organization that's federal. It has federal force, and its orders now being enacted because the White House is directing OSHA to do this. Biden, the impatient, losing his patience President Biden, has ordered OSHA to ensure that firms who have more than 100 employees must have all of those employees vaccinated, or they face regular testing. And then, of course, simply as an employer itself, and this is possibly the biggest single stroke that can be pulled by this White House, is imposing vaccinations without the alternative of testing otherwise on the government's own employees and contractors. So we're talking about something like 100 and, accounts vary the number of employees, but we know it's the biggest employer in the country. And you add on those contractors too, who subcontract for government work, and you've got a huge swath of the working population that will now be covered by the need for vaccination.
It's just it's something that I look at and I don't understand. I do understand, not that I agree with him, but I do understand. As I'm very cautious to say, people that have just never believed in vaccines, they have never taken them. They're not. This is not a political decision. This is the decision. But the thing that just scares me here, David, is the way this country, every problem we face, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's hurricanes, whether it's wildfires, whether it's climate change, whatever it is, nothing, the us against them attitude isn't even based on facts, it's based on politics.
That's right, and we have inevitably we have the what I can only describe as the other side of the coin with this new push by the federal government. We get the other side of the coin in what I'm going to use a carefully chosen word here for this: the wrong-headed territories like Florida. And yes, I mean the head of the state of Florida, being the governor Ron DeSantis, wrong-headed in a very literal sense. There are now legal fights over things like the mask requirements in schools being banned by the state authorities. The state authorities are trying to ban mask mandates there, and it's on hold now because of the intervention of courts. But there you have the underside of this, the counterpoint, and of course we know the other states that are in some similar situation, using, as you say, a political judgment to fly in the face of what one would think. I certainly think, and it sounds like you think, this is just plain common sense to deal with a pandemic. I'm thinking now, of course, about Texas, governed, if that's the word, by Greg Abbott, and it's now, I mean, on a separate issue, it's now in the situation of being sued by the Biden administration's Justice Department. We don't want to stray into the abortion argument now, but that's an indication of these lines so firmly dividing the nation. It's interesting to see that in yet another of these same kinds of states, in a way, news from the Arizona Republic, a good newspaper in that state. Let me just quote the headline. Governor Ducey is complaining that Biden is acting like a dictator on COVID. That's rich, says the Arizona Republic, because their governor, too, is known for a kind of high-handedness, and of course, you know, yet again, like some of the others, flying in the face of scientific fact as well. You know, we must also not forget that on not so much political grounds, but on public health grounds, there are others who are opposed to Biden's very firm actions of last night. There are voices who say that the plan simply doesn't go far enough. Dr. Leana Wen, who used to be the health commissioner for the city of Baltimore, is actually has a platform of her own now as a columnist of the Washington Post, and she's arguing very strongly in a piece she wrote for the Capitol's paper, saying that, you know, we've got to get, you know, not only have you to lose patience with the unvaccinated, the quarter of the population it is now who still remain unvaccinated, that you must get really, really firm with them, and that even the new stronger measures of last night from the president are not enough, and they must be tightened further.
Now, do we have good news that we can do our fanfare for?
Well, it's not so much news. We are news media. I mean, it is news media we look at, which is mainly about the present. But of course, inevitably this week, it's been a case of looking backwards in a very somber way. But amongst the somberness, I found one bright area that I would like to celebrate with a fanfare. Yes. The fanfare for a piece of media work that's been nestling separate from the huge tsunami of coverage to mark 20 years since the 9/11 attacks of 2001. I'm sorry. And now that we've reached 2021, it is an entire generation who's grown up not knowing about the events of September 11, 2001. So inevitably, and rightly, and with due somberness, there's been this huge amount of material marking this point in the calendar. But let's note also the touch of originality that had NPR's Morning Edition program invite onto its airwaves the Jamaican writer Marlon James. The idea here was to talk about 9/11's effect, not as usual in the rest of the welter of media material, not as usual national security, the effect on national security, on the economy, on our politics, our social psychology, but on the literature, the fiction that's been created and influenced by the attacks and the aftermath. Barnum James talked very insightfully with the host Rachel Martin about novels like, I don't know if you've read them, I've got a great deal of pleasure out of these, Corman McCarthy's The Road, Colin McCann's Let the Great World Spin, Claire Messud's The Emperor's Children, Mohsin Hamid's The Reluctant Fundamentalist, all great novels, and he mentioned short stories too. Sometimes the novel or the short story worth noting, he says, has nothing to do directly with terrorism, but this really thoughtful radio, and I recommend you check it out at the NPR website or on the app. It's a very telling way to get at the broad ways that our entire culture has been affected by 9/11, often in strangely subtle ways, I'd say, how the big and the small assumptions we previously entertained have been challenged or even abandoned often, to frightening effect sometimes, and also to energizing effect as well. It's well worth reflecting on. Just step away from the natural and the predictable and the expected, and think a little bit about how our culture in general has been affected by those terrible events 20 years ago.
Yeah, I was just mentioning earlier this morning, talking with our meteorologist, that September 11th brought about many changes, some positive, but so many changes that are negative, and I guess they had to be. The Patriot Act included in it a lot of the loss of our liberties and our freedom and our privacy that we enjoyed before 9/11. That is all totally gone now.
Yeah, vitally important things like the fact that the nation, or its leaders at least, and its secret services, most sinisterly of all, opted to use torture, something that America would have blanched at before. People with memories of the Second World War would be horrified to know that our own national security operatives were torturing people. That's a choice that was made on our behalf, and right down to small things too. I was involved in broadcasting a piece this last week to the British audience, and I was asked to do it because I'm in New York now, so clearly that gave them a standpoint that they wish to have represented, and I was the voice from New York, the town of the Twin Towers coming down. But the whole venture was mounted because this highly popular, very widely listened to radio program in Great Britain. The very editorial team on that program included people so young that they did not actually, they realized as they went around and did a canvass of their team members that people didn't actually know exactly what happened on 9/11. And it was well worth just going back over the facts and indeed drawing those broader conclusions that you mentioned about the very, very important changes of national policy that affected not just this country, but other countries that followed America's example as well, and even engaged in things like the collaborative efforts, like the secret rendition of captives who were interrogated in what were called, rather grimly, the CIA's black sites around the world. So yes, the ripples, the ramifications of the whole thing go far and they go deep, and it's well worth doing all that the media is doing right now to reflect on those terrible consequences of what happened. And of course, you know, we mustn't forget, because it's come right around. Because of a deadline set by this current administration. It has come around to the end of 20 years, entire 20 years of war in Afghanistan, with all that treasure and all that blood. wasted in the view of so many people now that we see it with the benefit of hindsight.
We'll move on from this. I want to mention two things that happened yesterday. Was our Attorney General, but also Stephen Breyer called the Supreme Court decision on Texas very, very, very wrong, and now the Justice Department is going to sue Texas. And when you look at this law, David, and it puts the rights to sue without any foundation in the hands of individuals, basically making anybody a bounty hunter that can sue for $10,000.
Yes, the deputizing of individuals to carry out a kind of private prosecution, if you like, persecution, some people would call it, is a very insidious development, and understandably enough, the Biden administration's Justice Department is energized by it, and Merrick Garland, the new Attorney General, is being really quite clear about why this is happening. It's because other states might want to emulate the technique, and the interesting question was posed in certain media venues over the last couple of days. The question is, and it was a question actually put to the Justice Breyer himself when Nina Totenberg of NPR sat down for one of those long interviews she occasionally gets with members of the topmost bench in the country. She asked him what would happen if a state like New York, for instance, decided to ban guns in private hands, and then did the same trick, if you like, a legislative trick, as Texas did, and deputized citizens of New York State to blow the whistle, or alternatively, if you like, become bounty hunters in suing individuals who wanted to hold on to their guns. And what would this current Supreme Court do in that situation there? Well, of course, Justice Breyer said, well, dismiss that as a hypothetical question. But, of course, the Justice Department doesn't think it's so hypothetical. They're concerned that other states on other issues, not necessarily gun ownership, of course, but a whole range of contentious issues, that they might want to take the same approach, dissipate the enforcement arm of the legislation, if you like, into the hands of individuals. Any citizen of the state would have the right to pursue action in this way through courts, and even gain some money by it, which seems to be the case in Texas. And of course, this is highly dangerous for what we consider traditionally to be the real rule of law.
Well, I think the Justice Department going after this on this matter, it's a different case now that'll be brought before the Supreme Court, because this really opens up a can of worms that once it's opened up, it's like once the horses and cows are out of the barn, they're out of the barn. This is a real dangerous situation in this country that can lead to this, as you just said, not only with abortion, but with anything and anybody that wants to put up in any state.
That is the fear, and I think that's why the Justice Department is moving with the alacrity and the speed that it is.
There's so much that is going on currently, and it's unbelievable that we're almost 20 minutes into our conversation, and I'm going to bring this up, and that is President Biden and the leader of China held their first call since he's been in office in 7 months, and really talked about, getting these countries more together on things they can agree on than just being totally against one another.
It was an unusual conversation for the current times in terms of our relationship between China and the United States, in that it wasn't abusive. Most of the so-called diplomatic exchanges between Beijing and Washington over the last 6 months, and perhaps longer, but certainly since January 20th, we've had exchanges that would never really have been classed as diplomatic in previous times, But suddenly, although the White House was at pains to say that Biden was talking tough with Chairman Xi, it was a businesslike, and that's another wonderful diplomatic euphemism, isn't it, for people being very clear with each other. It was a businesslike exchange, and laying the ground for, one hopes, some improvement against a backdrop, of course, of this administration making it very clear that China will always be a rival in terms of business and in terms of sphere of influence politics, if you like, and especially in the Asia-Pacific region, and that will be the overall underpinning of all policy from now on. But at least, as is often pointed out by sage analysts and diplomats themselves, there's no point in having enemies if you don't talk to them. It's important to, it's really important to make sure that you don't have your conversations, your international conversations, only with people who are on your side. Engaging with opponents is the vital core of diplomacy, of course, and that's exactly what was happening in this change of mood that was established by the phone call yesterday.
Do you think that there's any chance, now that we've reached this next anniversary of September 11th, do you think there's any change that somehow the pendulum will swing back? And is there something that can bring this country, I'm not saying together a kumbaya, but brings more sense of reality to the country and to the world as a whole? Because really, the igniting force for most of the change we've seen, good and bad, was what happened on September 11th.
Sure, and some of the extremities of what it has driven us to, or some force that's been encouraged by the mood of belligerence that followed from 9/11, is perhaps remediable. I'm not sure. Tiny little signs are happening. It's interesting to see that the government, another governor, we've gone through quite a few governors today, another governor of the former governor, I should say, of the great state of New Jersey, and next door to me here in New York, Chris Christie, a close ally of Donald Trump for a long time, and in many ways a voice of the very belligerence I've been referring to. But he's making some very interesting efforts to rein in some of the extreme thinking that's gone on, and he is now even suggesting to Trumpist followers, I suppose, that must be the target firmest in his mind, that it's time for the Republican Party to just get over their frenzy over supposed election fraud in 2020 and accept the result that Biden is the duly elected president of the United States, and just get on and accept what he's calling the new reality. So at least if we don't have a cessation of hostilities, as you're suggesting, we're certainly not in for any kind of kumbaya moment, and what we can perhaps expect, though, is a general sort of sense of realism. I mean, that may be too much to hope for, but I trust not. And although that might be just a straw in the wind, what I've been saying about Governor Christie, I think there's an awful lot of even Trump sympathetic Republican leaders who just want to get back to some basic realities and an acceptance of the reality that we live with, that we're going to be forced to live with now, like climate change, like the inevitable fact that we're not in any sense directing international events in any way. We may be a superpower still, but we don't. We're much chastened, I think, by the Afghanistan experience. And again, it's a matter of facing reality. Let's hope that we can come together around realism.
It's definitely an interesting time we live through. David, it's always great to speak to you. We'll speak to you again next week.
Look forward to that.
David Tereshchuk with the Media Beat here on Robert Hood Radio, roberthoodradio.com.